Radio Mano Papachango.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of Tangentially Speaking. Today's guest is a very interesting guy who's doing important work in the world. His name's Urbina, U-R-B-I-N-A, Urbina, not sure which accent is right there. But in any case, he's won a Pulitzer Prize, George Polk Award. He's been nominated for an Emmy. He's a very serious journalist who's not afraid to laugh, I'm happy to say. And he's doing very serious work, but he maintains a sense of humor about it, and we talk about these things. His last book is a New York Times bestseller. It's called The Outlaw Ocean, based on more than 5 years of reporting. He spent a lot of time on ships exploring lawlessness on the high seas, ranging from smuggling, arms trafficking, human smuggling, drug smuggling, the whole thing, everything you can imagine, dumping oil and garbage and all sorts of stuff out there where nobody catches you. And so it's a very important work. He's doing, if you say a journalist at best is someone who brings things into the light that are happening in the darkness. And the deepest darkness is distance, right? The most hidden place on the earth is some spot out in the middle of the ocean where no one sees. Nobody's there. So Ian's work is extremely important, and I hope you'll check him out after listening to this conversation, which is awesome. And I want to thank Joel Havea for bringing Ian to my attention. You've heard Joel's music on this podcast before, and I'm going to play one of his songs at the end of this little introduction. He's a musician, a singer-songwriter, and he sent me an email a couple weeks ago just saying, hey, I thought you might be interested in this guy's work. I'm working with him because, as you'll hear, one of the things that they're trying to do at the Outlaw Ocean is to sort of work together with different types of artists and create this kind of multimedia movement around the environmental work that they're doing. And so Joel Havea is one of the musicians that they're working with. And so Joel got in touch and put me in touch with Ian, and here we are. You can learn more about what Ian's up to by going to the official website of the project, which is theoutlawoceanmusic.com. Or you can follow him on Instagram and Twitter. His tag is @Ian_Urbina. And so that's how you can keep an eye on what they're up to and support them. As you'll hear in the conversation, a lot of what they do is supported directly by individuals. So if you've got an extra few bucks a month that you want to send their way to keep them afloat, please consider doing that. All right, before I get into this, I want to say this is episode 498. I'm going to record Aroma, which will be 499. I'll put that out in a couple of days. And then episode 500 is coming up. That's going to be live streamed, ladies and gentlemen, something I have not done before. But Mike Marr, who has I think it's called Take a Deep Breath podcast. He and I have been in touch. He's been setting up my YouTube channel, Chris Ryan, which I encourage you to check out. There are all kinds of things there, including this episode will be posted there. When I record these remote episodes, I do it through a system that records the video as well. So if the guest is down for it, I just post the videos up there so you can see us talking if you're a visual kind of person. So you can check that out. In any case, we're doing this this thing Sunday the 24th. Yes, today is Wednesday the 19th as I record this. And Sunday the 24th at 12:30 p.m. Mountain Time, we're going to be live streaming this. I don't have a link to offer you at this point, but it's going to be on my site on YouTube. So if you go to YouTube, go to Chris Ryan, you'll see it there. And it'll be recorded, and of course we'll post it afterwards. So if you can't make it at 12:30 p.m. for the live stream, you can always watch it later. Mike and Anya Katz will both be joining me, and I think the idea is that they're going to interview me more or less about my vast experience now as a podcaster, hitting 500 episodes. But as always happens, I'm sure we'll just wander off into whatever conversation comes up. And since it's being live streamed, hopefully we'll be taking questions from you. So if you tune in, there's going to be a scrolling thing on the side so that we'll be able to see your suggestions and questions and comments and whatever. So hopefully it'll be interactive. 12:30 p.m., Sunday the 24th, Mountain Time. Hope to see you there. All right, I think that's it as far as announcements go. Without further ado, since I'm going to do that Roma and I've got all sorts of things I can rant and rave about on that, I'll just shut the hell up and go right into this conversation with Mr. Ian Urbina. Fantastic guy, really cool. And I'm going to play you out with the song I mentioned by Joel Havea. It's called Mother... what is it called? Mother Mauna, I think is the pronunciation. Mother Moana, yeah. And it's, I believe Moana is maybe Hawaiian or Polynesian word referring to the ocean. And if you listen to the lyric, it's sort of a dialogue between those who think that the ocean is an endless resource to be exploited. The first words are, look at her, she's endless, feels like infinity. Those pesky laws are overzealous and make no sense to me, right? Every day we're just fishing in the sea. What we do, nobody sees. And then there's a dialogue, Tongan chant, right? The word is Tongan, from Tonga, which I believe is where Ian or Joel is from. In any case, then the response is, look at her, Mother Moana. It's not hard to understand here on earth we're all connected through water, air, and land. She's so much more than a source of oil and food. What's bad for her is bad for you too. Doesn't it seem that's the essential insight that somehow our species had for years and lost? This idea that the external and the internal are connected, that there is no real separation between what's going on in your blood and your gut and what's going on in the environment around us. It seems like that's the lesson the world keeps trying to teach us, and we keep somehow not hearing. In any case, I hope you enjoy this song. It's by Joel Havea, and it's called Mother Moana. And please consider looking into Ian's work more. He's the real deal. It's an honor to chat with a guy like this a little bit. All right, I'll talk to you again in a couple of days. I hope to see you Sunday.
Look at her, she's endless, feels like infinity. kilos are overzealous and make no sense to me. What's wrong with our FAD? We've already paid the licensing fee. Every day we're just fishing in the sea. Anyway, what we do nobody sees. Look at her, she's ready to drill and to exploit. And our shareholders are many, profits they do enjoy. What's wrong with a spill or two? She will be okay, is our point of view. Every day we're just drilling in the sea. Anyway, what we do nobody sees. The outlaw oceans hard and cold, but there are people fighting for her soul. Look at her, Mother Moana. It's not hard to understand. Here on earth we're all connected through water and land. She's so much more than a source of oil and food. What's bad for her is bad for you too. Every day we're just fighting for the sea. Here to stay, even if nobody sees. We're just fighting for the sea. Fighting, fighting, fighting for the sea. Here to stay, even if nobody sees. Nobody, nobody, even if nobody sees. Even if nobody sees. Even if nobody, nobody, nobody sees.
Okay, after a bit of fiddling around, I think we've got the technology worked out. Welcome, Ian. Thank you for finding some time to chat today.
Thanks for having me.
You, when we were lamenting our technological issues here a few minutes ago, you mentioned the Siren Song. And I wonder if that's a sort of central image for you, if being we're talking about the outlaw ocean and the challenges and the temptations and the dangers and the suffering, and I mean the Siren Song sort of sums a lot of that stuff up, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it mostly sums up the ocean itself as the siren, and that there's something deeply alluring about the place, but it can be dark and dangerous.
Yeah. So is the Outlaw Ocean, this is your most recent project, right? Yeah.
It is.
And is it an ongoing work, or have you finished it and at this point you're promoting it and then you'll move on to something else? It seems like you're sort of the sort of journalism you do must form a lasting connection. It must be hard to move on from one project to the next.
Yeah, I mean, this project more so than any other. So I was on staff for 17 years at the New York Times doing investigative projects, which typically would last maybe 2 years. And then in 2014, I started the Outlaw Ocean reporting for the paper, and that series ran in the New York Times for 2 years. And then, editors normally want you to move on to a new topic, but I decided to take 2 years off to go write the book and go back out to sea. And so I did that for 2 years. And then when I came back, I went back to the paper for 1 year and just found myself too captive by the topic and also too struck by the sort of lack of this sort of journalism about the space and the issues. So I decided to leave the paper and create my own small nonprofit journalism organization to continue producing these sorts of stories. And so we're now 2 years old, the Outlaw Ocean Project, it's called, and we have a staff of 10, and we produce 8 to 10 big stories a year for the New York Times and the New Yorker and the Economist and others.
That's got to be a really difficult situation to be in the sense that these news organizations used to have the funding and, were structured in such a way that they could afford to send someone like you out on a long project. And now you've got to sort of do it all yourself, almost on spec, and then place it in these organizations. Are there other people doing this? This seems to be a real difficult moment, a sort of a transitional moment, then you're holding on in a way to something that seems to be slipping away in terms of journalism.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a weird way that the sort of the market and the profession of journalism has been changed hugely by the internet, and one of the consequences for legacy outlets like the New York Times is that they are pulling back from long-form investigative international journalism because it's expensive, very expensive. So that has made, in its wake, in the void created, there have been these boutique nonprofit outfits that have emerged to try to fill that gap. And so ProPublica, I think, is the most famous and one of the first that is a similar model. It's all philanthropically funded, and they produce their own stories. They maintain ownership over them, and then they partner with distribution outlets. Then the Marshall and ProPublica was started by a New York Times guy, and the Marshall Project was started by another New York Times former executive editor, Bill Keller, and that focuses on criminal justice issues, similar model. And so the Outlaw Ocean Project, because both of those people are former colleagues, in fact, Bill Keller hired me at the New York Times, I sort of wanted to mimic that model. It's brutal in some ways and delightful in others, in the sense that funding your own journalism through philanthropic dollars is not a sustainable model, right. And so you can probably jumpstart something, but you can't grow and last in that framework. So what we do is we've tried to figure out creative entrepreneurial, methods of weaning ourselves from the philanthropic dollars. They fall in two categories. One is really just a plea to individual readers who want to put up $5 a month, something very small, but to support you in particular and your organization. And that's been decent. And then the other is collaborations with different types of artists. We have a big music project that we've spun off where we team up with musicians, hip hop, electronic, classical, you name it, from all around the world. And we make music tied to the journalism using some of the sounds and the reporting. And then we publish the albums, and anything made on the music, 50% goes back to the musician and 50% goes into the nonprofit for more journalism. And that's been very successful. We have over 500 musicians and 90 million listeners. And so we're trying to sort of scale that entrepreneurial model up and move into animation, video game, mural art, other forms of collaborative art efforts that get the reporting out further, but also maybe in a small way fund more of the journalism.
Well, that's interesting. It almost makes me hopeful for the future of what you're doing. I mean, it must be really hard for you because you're trying to do 15 different things simultaneously. But it sounds like you're establishing a model that other people might be able to follow down the road a bit.
I think so. I mean, I think the model of collaboration with other types of creators is definitely replicatable. I think the specific model of doing music based on the stories, time will tell whether that can be replicated. We're making it work because we built a sort of custom design thing from the ground up. Whether it's transferable is hard to say. But we even in the very way we report when we're out there, we're always making sure we're capturing audio at the same time as video and stills and the written word, so that we can grow our and so you really have to think about this on the front end so that you have the right type of material on the tail end to do this sort of stuff. But yeah, I think there is real possibility, and collaboration between journalists and other types of creators doesn't happen enough.
Yeah. So adding another hat to your many hats here, you're also an anthropologist, am I right?
I would say retired, former, I went to grad school, and that was my, I did my doctoral work and field work in cultural anthropology. And then I pivoted into journalism. And I think journalism of a certain sort is a kind of short order chef anthropology, right. If done well. But yeah, that's my training, my academic
That's
training.
interesting. And you did your field work in, was it Singapore or Malaysia?
No, so I did my fieldwork in Mexico and Cuba, primarily in Cuba. I lived in Cuba for a while, but I ran away from my dissertation. My procrastinatory period was in Singapore when I was burnt out on 3 chapters in and cold winters of Chicago and needed a break. And so I went and got a job on a ship in Singapore. That's why you remember it.
Okay.
And that was my first exposure to seafarers.
Right. I've got some personal connection with this stuff. I after college, I hitchhiked up to Alaska and spent 2 summers working in the fishing industry. So when you were describing the fish guts and the slipping and sliding around and all the heavy machinery and all that stuff, when I was looking into your work, a lot of that's familiar. I still get that when I go to a fish market and I just smell that. For most people, it would be disgusting. For me, it smells like youth,
And where exactly in Alaska? What type of fish? Tell me a little more.
The first summer I worked in a cannery in Kenai. It was 1983. And then the second summer, I went down to Seward and just total strain. I have no experience on boats or anything, but somehow I got a job as a deckhand on a tender that was working out of Seward in what's it called there, Prince William Sound, and then that boat was based in Kodiak. So at the end of the summer, we went to Kodiak and.
Nice.
Yeah,
wow.
that was I experienced some of the Outlaw Ocean on that boat. It was me, this horrible dude, and the dude's son, who was this sweet 17-year-old who was spending his first summer with his dad, who divorced his mom when he was a kid. So it was like this kid was sort of seeing his dad for the first time. And his dad was just a total douchebag, awful guy.
Oh, wow.
And so it ended up being almost cinematic. It was like a struggle between dad and me for the soul of his son, And there were moments. I remember at dinner one night, the father was saying some horrible stuff, and I spoke up, and he looked at me and he said, I could shoot you and dump your body and no one would ever know. And I said, your son would know. Thank God.
Wow. Yeah. Well, that sums up. I mean, you very much get what people find hard to believe about the mentality and the hierarchy on ships. That is not the boss. That is God.
Yeah.
The captain is something that most other professions don't have in that workplace.
Yeah. And he, and you talk about the lawlessness of the sea. as a way to mess with me, he used to make me take the bags of garbage and just dump them off the side of the boat. And I was like, dude, we're going to be in Seward in 2 days. No, go throw it in the ocean, you little hippie, Yeah.
Yep. It sounds utterly authentic in a dark sort of way.
Yeah.
But and have you been up to Alaska since?
No, I keep wanting to go back. I'm at a time in my life now, I'm about to turn 60. So I'm sort of, there's, if, my girlfriend who's into astrology calls it the Saturn return. It's the second return of Saturn. And there is something cyclical about it. Right now I'm speaking to you from Antigua, Guatemala, where I first went 31 years ago. And so there's a return there. And we're thinking maybe we'll go to Alaska this summer. I have a van and we cruise around in the van. So we're thinking maybe it's time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's
have you
amazing.
spent time there?
I have never been.
Oh.
I've never been, but I very much want to go. But I did read Out of Alaska or Out of Country. What's this famous book about Alaska by the New Yorker guy?
Yeah. Coming into the country.
Right. And folks had told me, you really need to read it because the sort of frontiersman mentality and just the gritty level of detail that thing captures is what you probably should aspire for in the Outlaw Ocean. So when I was at sea, it was one of the only actual hard copy books I brought with me, and I brought it on tape, and I consumed the hell out of it. It was so helpful for me to be thinking about what writing about this sort of otherworldly place looks like, and so it was a real inspiration. So, and it made me really interested to go to Alaska to see what that world is like.
Yeah, that's a good book. I'd also recommend the book about Chris McCandless. What's that called? Into the Wild. It's also, that's an awesome book in many ways, but also the Alaska angle.
Right.
I was thinking when I was looking into your work, and I was thinking how it's these questions of illegality, human trafficking, arms smuggling, all the nastiness that's going on in the open sea right now, in many ways is very much a reflection of this particular moment in history with global trade going gangbusters and environmental issues front and center. But in another way, there's something kind of eternal about it, in the sense that in the 17th and 18th century, you had people being shanghaied, I guess was the phrase, people just being grabbed up on the streets of San Francisco, Jack London style, and thrown onto a boat and essentially enslaved. The death rates on these merchant ships in the days of Herman Melville and Joseph Conrad, were 50% or more of the guys who left port never came back. So there's this kind of, do you ever feel like, I'm constantly battling hopelessness, and I'm not focused on this stuff the way you have been. How do you keep your shit together?
Do I? I don't know. You should ask my family if I do. No, on hopelessness, I don't know. I think my coping mechanism is not to look at the war, not to look at can we win, are we winning, will we win the war, but rather just the individual battles and really trying to put in a good day in each battlefront that I can. And I think that the hopelessness in a weird way is almost the fuel that motivates me to keep going in the sense that it's just, there's a lot wrong out there. And I was born through that fateful lottery into conditions that are not Mumbai or Mogadishu or Kabul, or as a female in any of those places. And, my point being, I was born into a pretty lucky situation, and that shackles me with some serious guilt about what I owe, whatever, the universe or my fellow man or whatever you want to say. And so the notion of not trying to focus on doing my little part on this effort is it's scarier to me to think of the demons I'd be haunted by if I wasn't doing this sort of stuff than the things that might seem scary when I am doing this stuff.
Interesting.
I guess I put it that way.
And have you always felt a sense of responsibility? Where did that come from?
Yeah, I think I did. I mean, yeah, for better or for worse. And I don't say this with a sense of pride. I say it as sort of a matter of fact, and sometimes loathsome, annoying fact, because I envy those who aren't shackled by this. But yeah, as long as I can remember, I found one of the most troubling things in the world around me that so many people weren't haunted by this stuff. Like, even when confronted with the disparity in stark fashion, that it didn't get to them more than it does. And quite honestly, that it doesn't get to me more than it does. I function fine. You know, I go through my life. I live in a pretty luxurious middle-class existence, and such horrific stuff is happening. And so the ability to compartmentalize is obviously key to sanity, but at the same time, it's pretty insane. You know, the very fact of it, in light of what the disparity means for other people not that far away or very far away, is really dark, and that we kind of just go about our existence meanwhile is really heavy. And that's bothered me since I was, an adolescent.
Yeah, I had an experience with that just a couple hours ago when I was reading some interviews that you had done, and you mentioned Ranong and how you were there, I guess, doing some research. And I've been to Ranong many times. I have a friend who lives on Kopayam, just off the coast there. And, there are the boat people, the sort of people with no passport, and there are camps of them there on the island. And I did an interview with a missionary who was working with them there. And you talked about some of the horrible things that are going on, human slavery and trafficking and things happening in Ranong. And I'm thinking, I probably walked right by one of those clubs that you were talking about with no idea of what's going on 10 feet away from me.
Yeah. Yeah. And we all do. I mean, I am not on some higher ground than anyone else. So it's just a reality that I think we all, if we're honest, have to reckon with.
Yeah, it's almost like the industrial food system. You know, people look at the pork chop and have no idea what's going on at the slaughterhouse or the transportation or the, the destruction of the environment. It's just, I mean, I personally am constantly struggling with this stuff, like trying to not see the whole picture because the whole picture is so overwhelming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, it's a funny thing, right? I mean, the distance between producer and product is so wide now, and often so tangled, and often so intentionally murky. Yeah. But you have, like you said a second ago, and then things happen like the pandemic or the global supply chain lockdown, and you're like, whoa, like a little thing can cause a domino effect, which is still gripping our economy and could tip us into recession. So as distant and murky and whatever as we might think we are, a bat in some cave in China can shut the planet down in 6 months. Yeah. I mean, think about that. That's amazing. Or, a clog in, the Straits of Suez and LA left for 2 weeks can tip the planet into, it's just so, we are pretty darn connected, more than sometimes we realize, for better and for worse. You can also have positive chain ignite in similarly rapid fashion.
Yeah. Having spent this time in the ocean, do you feel? I've read in these interviews you recommended more rules and more enforcement to try to forestall some of these tragedies that you witnessed at sea. But how does that work? I mean, we've got we're talking about Alaska and this frontier mentality. Isn't the open ocean is the frontier, right? It's like the eternal frontier in the sense that national laws end whatever 10 miles out or whatever the margin is. Out there, it's a whole different world, and people are, they're flagging their ships in Panama or wherever it's cheaper, and it's there. People aren't even. Everyone's sort of disguised, and it feels hopeless to me. Like, how are we going to police the open sea? How would that happen? Satellites or drones?
First, I would say kind of what I was saying before is. A version of this point is the question sometimes I get, which is, so how do you solve the outlaw ocean? And my answer is not unlike if you asked, how do you solve injustice? The first thing you do is you don't ask that question because it's completely unanswerable. Right. And so you don't solve the outlaw ocean. And this is my metaphor about war versus battles. I think moving away from looking at the war and being overwhelmed by the war, it's important to recognize there is a war happening, but then coming down in the Outlaw Ocean framework and thinking instead about, okay, there are a lot of different, the Outlaw Ocean is 15 chapters, each one tackles a different thing: murder of stowaways and ocean dumping and arms trafficking and sea slavery and illegal fishing. And, there are some cross-cutting fixes that I think actually can go through a lot of the silos, and you cited one of them. Like, the potential to just have better monitoring of what's happening out there is a prerequisite to virtually everything, whether it's wage theft or murder or dumping of oil or illegal whaling or ocean plastic. And, if you don't know what's happening out there, then there's no chance in hell that any player, whether it's companies or governments or, a cabal of investors, on the board level at a company, activist investors or whatever, class action lawyers, whatever is the stakeholder group, if you can't even lay eyes on the problem in a sustained way, then you can't. So that's one huge thing. I think, but there are lots of others. Like, I think, and it feels a little Pollyanna to say it, but I do believe that likely change will happen with lots of different folks acting in lots of different capacities, even in one person at the same time. So you are a taxpayer, you're a donor, you give money to organizations, you're an interlocutor, you talk to people on your show or just at restaurants or whatever, you're a voter, you have lots of different hats you wear. You're a buyer and consumer. In all these places, you can exert some level of impact. It's infinitesimally small. I get it, but if first of all, we think of ourselves as individuals who don't just wear one hat, but wear 8 or 9 different ones. And in each of those, we try to figure out what are the small actions that we can do for one of the battles, not all of them. Like, my thing is stowaways. My thing is sea slavery. My thing is ocean plastic. I'm going to really try to double down, and I'm not going to buy that product. I'm going to have a conversation with my girlfriend. I'm going to, I think if people start doing that, the collective pressure does work. You look at blood diamonds, or you look at sweatshop garments, and you look at dolphin-free tuna. You look at other supply chain moments in history, social movements around product lines or whatever, and usually the sociological autopsy reveals that it was a whole bunch of things that came together, and they turned a corner. They didn't fix it. The war was never won. The shit's still happening, but it's way worse than it was before, and that's probably a multilateral thing. That's my theory.
And the first step of that is to bring attention to it and get the information out, which is obviously what you're doing. Right. Are you going undercover? Because when I read you talking about how you do interviews and you do a lot of research and you're very transparent about who you are and what you're doing. But it seems to me like that would make it very difficult. Like, what captain's going to let you on his ship if you're going to expose the wage slavery or the garbage dumping or the oil being, dumped into the ocean?
Yeah, it's a good question. So most of the reporting was done at the Times or under the Times rules. And, tier 1 venues, the Washington Post, the New Yorker, the Times, don't tend to sanction undercover. You can do things. We send reporters in to Syria during the war, and they're not allowed to be there. We routinely cross lines in journalism, but misrepresenting yourself is one of the rules that most outlets of a certain sort don't abide by, and I agree, generally speaking. So I don't go undercover. I don't announce myself in bright, colors when I go to Songkhla, Thailand, and I'm attempting to get on these ships. But when I'm talking, so to answer your question, if when we're doing the sea slavery reporting, we're trying to get out onto certain vessels that are 250, 300 miles from shore, getting the first captain to take us out the first 50 miles to get us on the next vessel is the hardest. And it actually gets easier with each hopscotch, because the further out you get, the less those guys care about the New York Times or some English-speaking journalist or whatever. They're bemused and befuddled as to why you want to get on their ship. But if you just say, and you also don't talk in terms that are automatically, you don't want to deceive them, but you don't want to use terms that just don't compute, like trafficking or sea slavery. You say, look, this is a brutal line of work. Violence happens here in both directions. Your guys jump you, mutiny, you beat them when you need to send a message. I just want to capture what is going on here. The world doesn't know how this work occurs, how difficult it is, how dangerous it is for lots of parties. And, would you let me and my team come on for 2 days and try to show the world what you do? And, normally they say, yes, but you can't photograph me. You can't name my ship. They lay ground rules. When we tell you get out of the way, get out of the way. But fine, because you're a curiosity to them too. And if you've done your initial pitch well, then they size you up as, seemingly a straight shooter,
right,
who knows a little bit about their world, and that usually is your ticket.
And that's accurate, because you're not there to get them personally in trouble. You're there to just show what's going on, right? And you don't need their name or their face to do that.
Yeah, it brings us back to Ranong, right? That exact incident is a place where you suddenly feel sullied as a journalist, as you well know, when you embrace that point you just made too much, right? So you might witness things where you ethically as a human, not as a journalist, feel like I need to get involved with this person right now. I need to do something right now, even if it compromises the story, because to not do so is pretty dark and self-serving. And those moral conflicts come up once in a while where you feel gross for having cared more about your story than it. The whole rhetoric, as you well know, is yes, but your story might change the rules of the game, might change and help this person if you play your cards right and get to the police in time. Some days I believe that rhetoric, and other days I think it's bullshit, and it's just a cover for wanting to do my story.
Yeah. There was a time in the 80s when I was considering trying to get into photojournalism as a career. And I was living in Manhattan. I took some classes, and I remember one of the teachers was a prize-winning photojournalism. I forget his name, or photojournalist. He'd lost a foot. He stepped on a landmine in Rhodesia or somewhere, and he would cover El Salvador. Just really in the muck of this stuff. And I remember one night we went out for drinks, and he was talking about how he was totally committed to that perspective that you just described, to the point where if he walked past someone being murdered, he would photograph it. He would not try to help the person. And if the person was lying there bleeding to death, he would take photos. He would not try to staunch the wound, And we were just aghast. Like that was just such incomprehensible thing to say. But he went and he told us this story about how he was in, I think it was Rhodesia, and there was a war happening, and this family sheltered him. And then the militia came, dragged the family out of the house, didn't bother with him because he was white, and he photographed while they murdered this family that had sheltered him. And I think that's how he won his Pulitzer or whatever it was that he won. And it was just like, man, I can't imagine the conflict, like I am here to witness. I am not here to intervene. And I understand it and I respect it, but I guess it's like a surgeon, right? You have to cut into someone to save them. There's some kind of purity that's foreign to me.
Yeah. No, I mean, my he's now retired, but a federal judge, and we used to have these really heated debates about the law, and abiding by the law, and it's a similar core tension, right? If you believe in the law writ large, to the extent that every part of it and every manifestation of it has to be abided by, then that's you. You're a fundamentalist at some level. If you think that maybe in some places the law is unjust and wrong and should be opposed, and you're willing to break it, then there's quite historical precedent for lots of people that we now look fondly upon, but at the time were considered, and I sort of feel like the same way. And I said, when we were growing up, I was like, I can never go to law school because I can't swallow that pill. And similarly in journalism, I've never swallowed the pill all the way to the extent that your professor has. I couldn't do that and live with myself. I don't believe in the profession of journalism to that religious fundamental degree that I think that's the right ethical thing to do. It might be a pragmatic thing to do, like, well, if I help these folks, they will kill me. And so that's a different matter. Yeah. If you're claiming a journalistic argument, and I don't look down on those who do believe it. I've never been able to swallow that.
Yeah. I'm not sure how this is related, but I had a guy on the podcast recently, Stephen Donziger. Do you know about his case?
The name, remind me. I feel like it'll come to me.
Harvard law, sort of advocate of environmental. He did this work
down in Latin America,
right, in Ecuador, and he won the $5 billion judgment against Chevron. And now they have the Justice Department declined to prosecute him because he wouldn't turn over his computer and phone because he claimed attorney-client privilege. But Chevron got a private judge to prosecute him. I didn't even know this was possible. And now he's just been sentenced to 6 months in federal prison, despite the fact that the Justice Department refused to involve itself in this. It's unprecedented.
Yeah, no, I remember the Donziger case and the sort of blowback where I guess it was it Shell or Chevron?
Yeah, but it was Texaco, and then they were bought by Chevron. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so is he due to serve soon, or is he going to appeal?
Yeah, they're sending him to prison within a day or two. It's coming down now. Yeah, it's incredible. But I mean, I'm reminded of his case because, the Amazon, like the open ocean, is this kind of unpoliced Wild West area. And you can get in a lot of trouble because there are a lot of very powerful forces out there.
Yeah, what's funny is, I did a series over the course of 3 years, early days, on fracking, called Drilling Down at the New York Times. It was one of my first big investigative projects. And I had been warned on the front end, there are 3 players in society as a journalist that you should be real ready for blowback when you go up against. One is Scientology, the other is the Catholic Church, and the third is oil and gas industry. And I was like, okay, I got it. And we went into battle and we ran this series. And it was amazing. It became the Matt Damon movie, Promised Land. And it was one of my proudest series. And it got incredible blowback from the oil and gas industry, to the extent that they had, that Aaron Brockovich scene where they're all at the board table and she calls in like the office staff to make it look like they have more lawyers. We had a meeting at the New York Times where Exxon and a bunch of these other companies sent their people and were saying I should be fired. Not a single 11 front page stories in 12 months, not a single factual correction on any one of them. But the blowback of that was incredible. I was on the subway once here in DC. I look across and there's a free paper they hand out, and it had a headline, New York Times reporter stock and coal reason going against fracking. It was a whole story. I don't own a stock. I've never owned a stock in my life. I don't even know how the stock market works. It was like all fabricated stuff so these guys play really dirty and really aggressive. The Outlaw Ocean, zero blowback. The closest thing to blowback was I got a call from the Thai ambassador after the first sea slavery piece ran. He said, let's go to lunch. And, he did what ambassadors do. Like, we want an open communication, and, we're sorry we didn't answer your calls initially. Now we understand, and how can we help? And that's it. It's because the adversary is so disparate, in the Outlaw Ocean that it's a hard line of reporting, but not because of the blowback. Fracking was hard. It wasn't disparate, but it was really bare knuckled, so it's just funny how topics vary depending on who you're going up against and do they have a well-paid lobby.
Yeah. Do you ever, like when I think about situations like that, it strikes me that the individual people don't even necessarily believe the positions that they're taking, right? Like the lawyers for Exxon, they're not necessarily evil people, right? They're well-paid lawyers. Maybe they give maybe they support you. Maybe they're sending, your organization a check every month. And hopefully this is as close as I get to being an optimist. But you know what I mean? There's this, sometimes I feel like there's a superorganism element to this. There's something that happens that goes beyond the individual. So, like you see these ads, Exxon believes, and it's like, well, how can Exxon believe anything? Exxon's a non-human entity, right? It doesn't exist in a tangible sense. Sometimes it's like as individuals, I feel like we're trying to affect change, and we're trying to convince people of things, and we've got our arguments and our reasoning, but it feels like we're caught in these giant sloshing historical.
I love your metaphor. Yes, I hear the point you're making, and yeah, there is a dialectic almost that we're both a part of, and a lot of people are playing a role, whether they believe it or not. They know they're acting. I think most of the folks believe enough of it, and then they avoid stuff that will challenge their outlook. I believe in energy independence, and I believe in jobs for West Virginians, and I believe in fighting for the little man, and I believe that government is overreaching, and so I'm Joe Manchin, and I'm going to go up against the climate bill. I think he believes those tenets. And Manchin's different. Like, if he's representing, his job is to represent his people, period, above all else, even if it means that, be damned the planet. His job is to okay, and that's what he believes in. I bet if you got him a couple glasses of wine in, I bet you could get to that truism. I believe in climate change. I believe coal should go, but my job is to represent West Virginians, and 70% of them are in coal, and so I got to keep them employed. And I'm going to kill this bill. That's, I think, what these folks believe in. Same thing with the fracking folks. They don't read really closely and challenge their beliefs and think, maybe I shouldn't have this job in the first place because it's going to end up hurting West Virginians in 30 years, even if I help them in 3. So I should let someone else do this job because it's unethical. I don't think they really reckon in that way. Yeah,
well, and that sort of brings it back to the initial point, right? Like if Joe Manchin quits out of some ethical concern, Exxon will just get someone else elected who will, vote exactly the way they want, right? I mean, to me, it seems like representative democracy has become representing corporate interests. Sinema and Manchin get all this money from energy companies and big pharma, and so of course they vote against, the right to negotiate drug prices or any kind of climate change. it just feels, that's the sloshing of it. I feel like we as individuals are trying to do our thing, and even if we could convince someone like Manchin to see the light, it's not going to change anything, because then, people say to me, good people work at Exxon, and it's like, yeah, I'm sure they do, but if the CEO of Exxon took some ayahuasca with his son in Peru and came back and said, we've got to stop this deep water drilling, this is crazy, the fracking is destroying the planet and the aquifer and all that, well, he'd be out of a job by noon, right? So it doesn't matter, in a sense, the individual.
I mean, I guess I would say yes. The only, and it's funny for me to suddenly play the optimist part, since you're outflanking me on my home turf. But I think, I guess at the same time with the sloshing, I do think there can be big forces that are collectively mobilized that end up embarrassing the hell out of Exxon, right? Like, you can have movements that then force industries, including big players within the industry like Exxon or Walmart or what have you, to be like, okay, we got to do something here. This is not going away. There are enough people now talking about it, showing up on comedy shows. It's showing up in major films. It's showing up in newspapers, as always. It's showing up all these places. And it's, my kids at school are coming home and they're talking about it, and it's everywhere. And we gotta do something. So let's start a rollout. Let's start a plan to get DEET. You look at, like, okay, cigarettes. You look at things that ultimately did change. Now we got vaping and other crap that they're peddling, but things do sometimes change. And David, once in a while, does take down Goliath, even if his cousin shows up the next day. So that's my attempt at optimism. Now, let me go back to my side of the field, please.
Yeah, sorry for dragging you down into the mud.
No, that's where I belong. I just normally am not the one arguing the counter, but anyway.
Well, thank you for doing that, though. I feel better. That's very helpful.
Good. It won't last. Don't worry.
It never does it? Yeah. So what's your next move? Do you have something else planned? Are you going to assault some other great evil? Slay another dragon?
No, I mean, I think I'm going to stick. I'm going to run my head at Goliath. This Goliath for a while more. So in the Outlaw Ocean Project, we got a staff of 9. We're 24 months old. We're producing 8 big stories a year. We got a big piece coming out in the New Yorker in about a month that has to do with some reporting we did in Libya about the migrant issue and sort of EU funding of stuff on the Mediterranean. Then are taking a good look at the Chinese, global squid fleet and what are they up to, and a bunch of places around the world. And so I think I'm going to stay. I mean, it's a big umbrella. It's a clever umbrella in the sense that 2/3 of the planet is our geographic jurisdiction, and 50 million people work out there. And if we say that our interest is at the intersection of labor, environment, and human rights, well, that kind of lets us do whatever the hell we want. That's a pretty big canvas of stories. And that's what we do. So yeah, we've got just a bunch of stories that we're going to launch on as soon as this Libya thing gets behind us. That's been our big focus for 9 months.
That's great. Yeah, I wish I'd met you a few years ago. I would have tried to lure you into something that probably would have been a big mistake for you, but I hosted. My friend and I co-created this event in Los Angeles called the Motherfucker Awards, and
wait, I know who's your friend. I know the other.
Kyle Tierman?
I know. Yeah, I know Kyle. How do I know Kyle? I met Kyle several years ago at some awards function, and he your first Motherfucker Awards. He sent me something, and I've been following it ever since. Is it no longer?
No, well, COVID sort of shut it down. And also just the fact that we're trying to get corporate sponsorship for, calling out the biggest fuckers of Mother Earth. Yeah.
That's a hard point. I know some development people who have a tough fundraising job, but that's a really tough one.
He said, baby, what's a big deal? Feel what you wanna feel. Say what you wanna say. You're gonna die one day. For example, I could kiss you just because I want to. What's the difference if you turn away? I'm gonna die one day. Why do you waste your time thinking about your reputation? Trying to meet an expectation, wondering what they're gonna say. When everyone you've ever known is headed for a headstone. I don't wanna give the end away, but we're gonna die one day. Your body is an animal, doesn't ask for much. A little music and a soft touch. Why don't you let it out to play? Your heart is in a birdcage, singing in your chest. You wanna shut it up but give it a rest. You're gonna die one day. Why do we waste our time thinking about a reputation? Running from a confrontation, wondering what we ought to say. When everyone we've ever known is headed for a headstone. I don't want to give the end away, but we're gonna die one day. We're gonna die one day. We're gonna die one day. So baby, what's a big deal? If you wanna be free, say what you wanna feel. Spend the night with me. I'm gonna take you up in my arms. And if we must go down, we'll go singing to the smoke alarms. We'll dance into the ground.